Hello everybody, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today. Perfect, yeah, so I'm Brooke. I run our employment program with REVEL. REVEL's a nonprofit organization. We're based out of Denver. We're in the Rhino neighborhood, but we are composed of a bunch of different programs and provide a lot of different types of support for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. REVEL, our mission is to be the bridge to adulthood for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to live meaningful and rich lives. Our vision is life without limits. So on top of our employment program that works to help individuals build up skills, become ready for employment, find jobs, and then maintain those jobs. We also provide support through daily group activities, behavioral and mental health therapy. We have outdoor adventure camps, social lounges, and then we have a separate teen program, so we do support more ages than just adults, but we don't have any age cap on the people we support, so we work with a whole different type of people. All right, so why am I here giving you guys this training today? So there are high rates of unemployment and then underemployment, so people working below their skill level for individuals with IDD, leading to financial strain, social isolation, reduced self-esteem, and increased risk of mental health problems. We often think of that direct relation of people being excluded from work and they can't financially support themselves, but there's a lot of things that go along with that. When we go to work, we have an expansion of our social network. We get to see a bunch of different people that we wouldn't normally see. Our community becomes larger and we get to interact with more people on a daily basis. When we exclude people from a workforce, we're not just removing their financial independence, but we're isolating them, and that leads to a lot of additional things here. So this is a major need, not just for people being able to contribute. Okay, so before we jump into content, we're going to play a little game. It's my Who Would You Hire game, construction edition, of course. So we're going to review 3 different roles and 3 different candidates. The candidates are going to stay the same, but I'm going to swap out the different roles for us. We're going to look at each of the candidates, and based on their work styles and traits, we're going to choose which candidate we would hire for the role. All right, we ready to play? Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to read through our candidates first, and then we'll talk about the position. So our first candidate, candidate 1, is consistent and detail-focused. They're excellent at following step-by-step instructions. They prefer predictable routines and avoids distractions. However, they might struggle with sudden changes in plan. Candidate 2 is high energy and physically strong, works best in fast-paced, hands-on environments, enjoys working with others, and loves to jump into those new tasks. However, if tasks feel repetitive, they might lose focus. And then our candidate 3 is confident communicating with people at all levels, picks up new tasks quickly and enjoys a variety, is comfortable in fast-changing environments, but they may rush when under pressure. So these are our 3 candidates, and our first role we're going to vote on is general laborer. In this role, they are supporting with a variety of physical tasks on site, including cleanup, materials handling, and assisting skilled workers. This role requires stamina, willingness to follow directions, and adaptability to changing site needs. All right, are we ready to vote on who we would choose? Okay, so we're just going to do a show of hands. So who would choose candidate 1 for our first role here? Okay, we've got a couple hands up. Candidate 2. All right. And what about candidate 3? A few hands there. Okay. So we had majority of people choosing candidate 1. Makes sense. There's a lot of attributes here that would help with this role. So that high energy, being willing to jump in. Construction site probably changes fairly often, so being willing to jump into those new tasks would probably be pretty important. And hopefully that losing focus wouldn't happen too often if we're having things switch around often. We had some hands up for candidate 3. Candidate 3 has some great skills as well. But let's take a look at some of our other roles and talk about who else we would hire for those. Okay, so our second role, remember our candidates are the same. Our second role is construction site coordinator. This person would be involved in overseeing daily activities on a construction site, ensuring that workers follow protocols, tasks are completed in correct order, and everything is organized and on track. I'll give you guys another second to look at our candidates again, and then we will vote with a show of hands again. All right, are we ready? Looks like we're still looking. Okay, who would go for candidate 1 for this role? Okay, a few people, okay. Candidate 2 and candidate 3. Okay, all right, cool. We've got a kind of a split between 1 and 2. Looked like a few more people on candidate 3. Probably with candidate 1, we're thinking detail focus. They're noticing all of those little things that need to go on. And then candidate 3, if they're overseeing that, those communication skills with all different types of people would probably come in handy there, picking up new tasks, and maybe that challenge of rushing when things are under pressure could come in handy here because we're on a schedule, right? We might need somebody to rush things along. Okay, let's look at our third role. Our third role is materials handler and warehouse support. For this role, they would be keeping track of materials, organizing stock, and ensuring deliveries are sorted and placed correctly. It requires attention to detail, consistency, and ability to work independently in a quieter environment. All right, so same candidates. Who would choose candidate 1 for this role? Awesome. Candidate 2 and candidate 3. Okay, we had consistent. Everybody chose candidate 1 here. So somebody who enjoys routine, this is probably a role that you're going to show up and do just about the same thing every day. So that struggling with changes in plans probably wouldn't be a big issue here, right? Okay, so who are these candidates and why are we talking about them? So each of these candidates has some strengths associated with different types of neurodiversity. So candidate 1 has strengths associated with somebody who has autism spectrum disorder. Candidate 2 has strengths associated with somebody with ADHD. And then candidate 3 is our non-IDD individual, so just kind of your general person here. So as we looked through the different candidates, we saw their different strengths and maybe some things that might be a little bit more difficult for them, but we were able to match up their strengths to the specific role. As we learn about neurodiversity, that's my hope, is that we start thinking about what the role is and who the person is and matching up strengths based on what we're actually asking them to do in a role. Oftentimes we think about roles as those, general good employee skills, like strong communication skills is in just about every job description that we see, but not every job really does require strong communication skills. So how do we evaluate for the role we are actually hiring for? So we're gonna dive in and learn a bit more about neurodiversity. And another thing I'd like to point out here is, while candidate 3 has a lot of those general great skills, let's say we placed candidate 3 in that warehouse role and they enjoy variety, or the person with ADHD who enjoys variety. While they might be really capable of doing that job, are they gonna enjoy it? Are they going to enjoy the repetitiveness of that role? And how long are they going to stay in the job? If somebody is a great communicator and that's a strength of theirs, and we put them in a job where they don't get to use that strength, they might stay for a little bit and then leave, and now you've got to fill the role again. So if we place based on strengths, we also have higher retention rates too. Okay, so let's talk about neurodiversity. What is neurodiversity? It is the range of differences in individual brain function and behavioral traits. It's basically just the differences in the way our brain works, the way our brain is wired. We can think of this term as our umbrella term with different types of neurodiversity falling underneath. This would be your great general broad term to use. Okay, so neurodiverse individuals are often excluded from the workplace, however, and the reason being is that there's a lot of stigma around neurodiverse people. There is a lack of awareness, lack of appropriate infrastructure, such as staffing structures and environmental factors. So what we're doing today is starting with understanding what it is, and then we can learn how to make some adjustments so we can get more of these very valuable employees in our workplaces. Okay, so language of neurodiversity, how should we talk about it? When we're talking about neurodiversity, if we're referring to it in a general sense rather than a specific person, it's fine to use person first or identity first language. I'll be using a mix intentionally throughout the presentation today. But if we're referring to a specific individual, it's always best to ask them how they'd like to be spoken about. So some people prefer person-first language, and that would be identifying the person first and the identity second. So a person with autism or an individual with Down syndrome. And then some people prefer identity-first language. They may feel that their neurodiversity is very integral to who they are. And so they might want you to refer to them as an autistic person or an ADHD individual. So just mentioning that identity first and then person second. So always best to ask there. Okay, so a few different examples of neurodiversity, and then we're going to jump a little bit more into autism. That is the population we specialize in working with. So ADHD stands for Attention Deficit and Hyperactivity Disorder. This is a very common disorder. Prevalence rate is about 1 in 20 people in the US. It's higher rates in children now, so that's going up. And so ADHD is characterized by persistent patterns of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsiveness that can affect daily functioning. There are, however, 3 different subtypes to ADHD, which adds to that complexity of how it might present. So for our 3 different subtypes, we have inattentive, hyperactive, impulsive, and then combined would be a combination of both. Kind of how I like to think about these different subtypes in a simple way. It's a lot more complex than this, but in a simple way, we can think of inattentive ADHD as maybe an internal battery. So somebody is functioning with a lot of energy internally. So they might be able to handle a lot of tasks at work. They might jump from task to task quickly. This might be somebody who's very ambitious, who is able to achieve things at a very fast rate. And then hyperactive impulsive might be more of the type of ADHD you might be familiar with, because that's we can think of that as more of our external battery. So somebody might be tapping their foot all the time, or a pen, or they might enjoy a lot of physical activity. And so being in a role where they get to be active in some sense would be really beneficial for them. And then combined can have symptoms of both types here. There are tons and tons of strengths of ADHD. As well. ADHD individuals tend to be very creative. They can be very forward-thinking. They're able to think of many things at once, hold a lot of thoughts in their brain at once, and that has a lot of benefits as well. And then dyslexia is another type of neurodiversity that's very common. About 1 in 10 people in the US have dyslexia, and this affects your ability to read, write, and spell. Individuals with dyslexia struggle with decoding words, reading fluency, and spelling. So in roles that require a lot of reading fluency, this could be a challenge or take a little bit more time. However, people with dyslexia tend to be very strong visual thinkers. So if we're in a role that is visual, then they can excel more than the average person would. Okay, and then now let's talk about autism. So autism is a developmental disorder, and it is defined by a constellation of behavior symptoms. So when somebody receives an autism diagnosis, this is going to be our 2 aspects here that they're looking at. So we're going to have impairments in reciprocal social communication, and then we're going to have restricted and repetitive behavior. So what does that really mean, though? So for our first aspects there, that's going to be our deficits in communication. That can look very different from person to person. A few examples here is that we can have deficits in the input of language, and so somebody might struggle to follow verbal directions, but written instructions could be great for them. Somebody might struggle with understanding different questions or concepts, or might just need them to be presented in a different way. And then we can have deficits in external communication, so they might completely understand what is coming in, but that output, maybe asking questions or letting you know, hey, I really need a break right now, or this workload is too much. That could be where we're having a little bit of trouble. And then nonverbal is another aspect here as well. Some individuals with autism are nonverbal, about 25 to 30%. Important to mention though that that does not mean they're not able to communicate, it just might look differently. So people can communicate fluently with things like talking devices and does not mean that they're necessarily intellectually impacted. And then for restricted and repetitive behaviors, one aspect of this that you maybe have heard of before is special interest. So individuals with autism have all sorts of different special interests, but it is an area that they enjoy spending a lot of time on, can be a real expert in that area. What that special interest in is going to depend on the person. So someone might be super interested in animation, someone might be super interested in construction or engineering or all sorts of different things. And then autism does vary by age, gender, and developmental level. The reason spectrum is in the name is because it is a very, very wide range. So our saying with that is that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. We really don't want to make any assumptions about other people with autism just because we know one or a few people with autism. The presentation is really complex. About 70% of people with autism have a comorbid diagnosis, so an additional diagnosis, and that adds to that complexity of presentation. I'd love to see a show of hands here too. Who does know somebody with autism? Look at that, we've got everybody. That's awesome. So our prevalence rate is up to 1 in 31 people in the US, so it makes sense, right? It's a large part of our population and they have a lot to offer. Okay, so there are unfortunately a lot of myths about autism though. So let's debunk a few of them. So our first one here is that all individuals with autism have an intellectual disability. This is absolutely not true. There is a wide range of intellectual ability with people with autism. Some people do have an intellectual disability, and then we have individuals with average intellectual level, and then we also have people with above average. So there's going to be a really wide range here. Really do not want to make any assumptions on this. Myth number 2, individuals with autism are not social. This is also not true. Many people with autism really enjoy socializing, having relationships, and that can be a very important part in their life. It just might look a little bit differently for them and how they enjoy socializing. And then myth number 3, people with autism are not capable of holding jobs or working. This is definitely not true. They're very capable individuals. We get to witness it firsthand in our program all the time, where we place people in employment and get to watch them really succeed and thrive in those roles. People with autism have a ton to offer the workforce, and we'll get to dive into that more. All right, so let's jump into the next aspect here. So executive functioning deficits. Executive functioning deficits are an aspect of a lot of different types of neurodiversity. It can be where we run into maybe some of our challenges, but there's a lot of things that we can do to mitigate these challenges and support individuals. But first step is understanding what are these challenges and why are they going on. So our executive functioning lives in the frontal lobe of our brain, and it's composed of these different aspects. So it's the ability to incorporate ideas, opinions, and additional information, understand abstract language, flexible and go with the flow, our regulation of emotion, and initiation, planning, and organization. So these are the different aspects that compose our executive functioning. So with ADHD, for example, an area that many people with ADHD who have our hyperactive impulsivity subtype can struggle with is initiation, planning, and organization, or that regulation of emotion. Individuals with autism can struggle with incorporating ideas and opinions other from aside from their own, and understanding abstract language. These can lead to things like perspective challenges for individuals, so being able to put themselves in other people's shoes or understand how much context to give when explaining something, what information might be relevant. These are things that could be a little bit challenging for somebody depending on their executive functioning, so something to keep in mind here. So what does an impact of symptoms look like? So what does living with neurodiversity might look like for somebody if we don't have the right support? So it can look like burnout, so going through our day and having a lot of input or not the right support, it can be exhausting and overwhelming. Many people face burnout who aren't neurodiverse as well from being in settings that don't play to our strengths. I'm sure we've all been in jobs where our strengths aren't being utilized, or we're having to work in areas that just aren't really a good fit for us, and we're showing up day after day, trying our hardest, and we're not getting great results. But when we get to work in our strengths and we show up and we put in the work and we get the results out of it, it's rewarding and we get a dopamine release in our brain. If we continue to try and struggle and things aren't working, then we have burnout happen, and that's why a lot of people have career changes or have to quit a job abruptly because they get burnt out and they need a change. This happens with neurodiverse individuals, and there are some added layers to that, like that sensory input as well. Avoiding, so staff might avoid tasks that are challenging for them and might not have the skills to communicate in the same way. So our communication skills, our systems are a place that we can really improve to support that. Not modifying behavior based on context, rigid expectations and routine, maybe some difficulty transitioning, and misunderstanding others' intentions or perspectives. Now, while there are challenges in neurodiversity, there are a ton of strengths, and we'll get to talk about how to mitigate those challenges or things that people might live with and really get to take advantage of the strengths. So this diagram shows a bunch of different strengths of a bunch of different types of neurodiversity. As I had mentioned with dyslexia, people with dyslexia tend to be really great visual thinkers, and so when they're in roles where visual thinking is the primary type, they really excel. People with learning disabilities have great loyalty and consistency in roles, so they might stay in a role for a really long time, great retention for an employer. Individuals with Tourette syndrome have really great cognitive control skills. People with autism have great concentration and fine detail processing. So a lot of different strengths for this as well. So if neurodiversity, or people with neurodiversity have all of these strengths, why are they not in the workforce? There are a ton of barriers in the hiring process for people with neurodiversity, and this leads to them not getting into roles as often. So some of our general barriers here are going to be inflexible job descriptions, so having really rigid rules and expectations on what it might take to do that job. All the time we look through job descriptions and we see these different traits or requirements that don't actually line up with what the function of the job is. So really looking at our job descriptions and thinking about what is required of this role and how are we evaluating for that, what is needed. Conversational interviews can be a major barrier for people who are neurodiverse and who might communicate differently. So behavioral questions and strict expectations on how somebody might answer that question. If somebody struggles to put themselves in your shoes, they might give a little bit too much context when answering a conversational question or not enough context. And then honesty and integrity. That might seem like a strange thing to be a barrier. We would hope that our hiring process would, reward people who have great honesty and integrity. Unfortunately, that is not the case. I bet we have a few people in this room who've maybe stretched the truth on a resume or rounded up their years of experience, or when asked what's your greatest weakness in an interview, maybe not actually shared your greatest weakness and chose one that wasn't quite as bad. So for people who are neurodiverse who might be very honest, This could really work against them in an interview situation where they really do share what their greatest weakness is, and, or they might just answer a question differently than a lot of other people would. And then homogeneity hiring is the act of hiring people who are similar to the people already in the role. This is usually stuff that happens in organizations. It's usually not intentional, but something to keep in mind is that we want to be open to diverse types of talent, and if we keep hiring the same people, we keep getting the same strengths and we keep getting the same weaknesses. So looking at your team and thinking about what could we benefit from here. Can we benefit from a visual thinker versus a linear thinker? Could we benefit from somebody who has great problem solving skills? Could we benefit from somebody who has a lot of energy and passion? And then basing your hiring decision off of that. And then with our executive functioning deficits, some of the barriers that come up here would be that abstract language and hidden rules. There are a lot of hidden rules in the hiring process, like, we don't ask for a cover letter or references, but it's good if you give them, or maybe we don't, mention the small talk on the way to the interview room, but that is considered when we're making our decision, things like that. And then social communication, and then that perspective taking that I've mentioned, so including maybe too much information or not enough when answering questions. All right, so some interview considerations for us to think about as well. So what if you were interviewing a candidate and this candidate did not make eye contact with you or made constant eye contact? What if they did not want to shake your hand? What if they clapped or flapped their hands during an interview? What if they paused for extended periods of time? What if they got up during an interview and paced around the room? Why do we see these things as red flags in an interview? I think many people here, if we were in an interview setting, we would see that as maybe a red flag for someone or be unsure about hiring them. And if our answer is that they wouldn't impact the ability of the person to do that job, then we shouldn't be considering it. Now, for some roles, some of these things might impact the ability. So for example, if the role is to sit at a desk for 8 hours and there's not a lot of movement and this person is pacing back and forth in the room, might not be a good fit, and that might be a good sign to say, hey, I don't think this is the right job for you. Maybe go apply for our role where there's a lot of physical movement. Now, if this job is really physical and they're pacing, that might be great. They're going to have a lot of energy and be able to have the stamina to continue doing that job. So really thinking about what is the role and is that going to inhibit their ability to do the role? If it's not a customer-facing role, does it matter if they make eye contact? Probably not. Okay, so we really want to aim for a workplace that has accommodations built in so that not everybody has to request them. And this is intended to both save them time and to save you time. Accommodations can be time consuming if they're not set up in the right way. So we all have different paths to successful learning, and that's important for us to think about when we're thinking about building in accommodations. So we all have our different preferences with feedback. How often do we like to receive feedback? What setting do we like to get feedback in? Are we someone who wants the feedback right then as we're doing a task so that we don't learn the wrong way to do it? Or do we prefer to have a separate conversation with someone so that we can fully process what they had said? Training, what does training look like for you? How are you best set up for success there? When you get a new piece of furniture and you open up the instruction manual, are you hoping it's going to have written in step-by-step instructions? Or are you hoping it's going to be IKEA style where it's the visual models? Or are you regardless going to go and look up a YouTube video so you can watch somebody build the furniture? We all probably have different preferences when it comes to that in this room. And so how can we really build that into the workplace so that we can have all of these different types of learners and give them all of their tools that they need to be successful and really save us time too, because if we don't support somebody's learning style, we're going to end up having to spend more time training or maybe some one-on-one coaching. But if we give everybody the tools they need initially, then that saves us that time. And then group versus individual. Are you somebody who prefers to work in a group or individually? Or when you are assigned that group project, do you want to start tackling it on your own first and then collaborate with the group second? Or do you want to brainstorm with the group and then be able to dive into your portion? We probably all have some different opinions on that in here too. So many accommodations are quick and low cost to implement. So let's talk about some things that we can do here. So our first one here is just the option to opt in and out of accommodations during onboarding. This seems like a really simple one, and there's a couple reasons why this is important. First of all, it signals to your employees that you're okay giving accommodations and that you are committed to them being successful in that role. We work with a lot of different neurodiverse people, and we have a lot of people in our program that choose to not disclose disability. We have a lot of people that choose to not request accommodations that could help make them more successful in the role because they're feeling unsure if their employer is going to respect their request, if they're going to view them differently. So we have this come up all the time in our program, and it is a real bummer when somebody could have done a much better job with a simple accommodation, but they didn't feel comfortable disclosing. So this is a way that you can signal to your employees that you're okay giving accommodations and that this is an inclusive space. Another reason is that this can save you a lot of time too. So allowing them to choose the tools initially that will allow them to do the job. So these can be things that you have already pre-made and are easy for you to provide to them. So you're providing a list that you've already set up. And such as instructions presented in multiple modalities. So with our furniture instruction example for tasks in these roles that are repetitive, that are going to consistently be a part of that job, why not create different types of instructions? Why do they all have to be written instructions? Why can't we make written, visual, and maybe a video? So different things like that that we can pre-make. It's a little bit of time up front, but then we can offer it to everybody. Clear standards and regular feedback, making sure that we have really clear standards there. Everybody understands what is expected of them. This will help all of your employees, not just your neurodiverse employees. A few additional ones here. So customized communication for daily tasks. This is a way to mitigate some of those communication challenges we did speak about. People with neurodiversity might have different communication styles, and that can be really beneficial. It gives them strengths in other areas, but in most roles, we need some type of communication, and that's why we tend to see it in a lot of job descriptions, but we can get creative here. So if somebody needs to communicate their daily tasks, or we need to add tasks on a daily basis, it's not always going to be exactly the same. Can we have some customized options for how that gets added to their list? Maybe it's a Google task list and we can add things on the computer. Maybe it's a notepad on their desk we can walk by and write it down rather than just verbally mentioning it to them. So just getting creative with those things and being open to different systems for people. Then we have providing different opportunities for feedback. So not everybody is going to feel comfortable in a verbal conversation giving feedback or receiving it in that manner. So just being open to providing it and receiving it in different ways. Customizable schedules and workspaces if possible. Definitely not possible for every role, but if it is possible, that's a great thing to be able to offer people. And then mentorship and coaching opportunities, pairing people up who have complementary strengths can be a really great way to go about this as well. So maybe you have somebody who is a very visual thinker, but can get a little distracted, and then you have another person on the team who has great planning and organization skills, and they collaborate, and that can be a really great partnership there, and somebody that they can feel comfortable bouncing ideas off of. So how can I support as a staff member? Maybe I'm not in a position to put in all of these different accommodations, but I still want to support my neurodiverse coworkers. So we firstly want to be open to different modes of communication and be flexible with expectations of our coworkers. If issues arise, be understanding of those perspective challenges. We definitely have those things come up where it's just a misunderstanding or miscommunication. So we want to be proactive in resolving any conflict you might have with somebody. Somebody might not realize that they've upset you or things like that, and they don't have any malintention there. So we want to resolve the conflict if we can. And then encourage others to be welcoming. We unfortunately have a lot of neurodiverse individuals in our program that have reported feeling unwelcomed by their coworkers. And so do your part in shifting that narrative, be open to different types of people, and be understanding of others. And then some specific strategies that you can try are asking questions. Everybody's different. I hope that's been made clear as we go through this. People with autism are different. Not everyone with autism presents the same, so we want to start by asking questions. How can I best support you? Do you prefer I give you feedback now or at a scheduled time? Do you prefer we talk here or in a quiet place? Just little things like that can be really beneficial. And then rephrasing. Clear is kind is a saying we like to say where we have a lot of times employers who are really trying to be nice and might dance around a point, but clear is usually the kindest way. So if you have feedback or you have expectations, be clear about them. And so you can make sure everybody's on the same page and mitigate any of those communication struggles that might come up. Pivot to different modes of communication. If verbal communication isn't working, don't just keep repeating yourself. Try switching it up, maybe writing down the steps, drawing out a diagram, different things like that. And then just be willing to modify your environment for sensory needs. I know we didn't get to watch the video, but sensory needs can be a major thing people are dealing with. So if you guys always are listening to music in the office, maybe being willing to put headphones in instead so someone can focus on their work. All right, and then I want to touch on some available resources for you guys. So I know I briefly talked about REVEL, but we have a lot of resources for employers as well, and we're always looking to partner with new businesses. So one major aspect of what we do is connections with employers to try and make more inclusive workspaces for our clients and for neurodiverse people in general. So we're always looking to connect and partner and be able to funnel some really qualified employees your way, help you look at your systems. We provide consultation support too, so if you're ever interested in looking at how are our roles divided in this department, and are they playing to our team's strengths? And we have some people with ADHD on the team, and how can we really maximize their strengths in this setting, things like that. We provide these trainings to employers free of cost. We have 3 different topics. You guys got kind of a condensed version of neurodiversity awareness and some of our inclusive hiring practices, but we have a lot more information we'd be happy to train on. And so we can train on neurodiversity awareness, creating inclusive workplace, and then inclusive hiring practices as well, where we can really dive into more of those barriers, job descriptions, interview styles, different things like that. And then our job coaches, so we have a team of job coaches that supports individuals. They work with them in pursuing whatever their employment goals are. So we have a really wide range of jobs that we support people get. Some people are working in maybe a warehouse setting, some other people in a restaurant, maybe a server, software engineers, architects, all sorts of different people with different interests. And we support them in either building up skills, finding employment, or maintaining it. So that's kind of our whole purpose there. But when we support individuals and they're in paid positions, we support a lot with making those materials or systems that help them be the most successful, and we really love to give those to employers too of, hey, this is working for one of your employees, you should have this on file in case you have other employees that could benefit from this. So we love doing that as well, and always open to any interesting ideas too for different roles. We oftentimes have people who are wanting to maybe work a 3-hour shift once a week and can help with that 3-hour task that eats up a bunch of your time every week you hate doing and they might love doing. So little creative ideas like that we love collaborating on. And then another resource to mention to you guys is the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. They have just on their website a lot of different resources that could be beneficial to you. So ADA employer basics, best etiquette guides and practices, specific resource guide list, and more information on employer incentives such as the work opportunity tax credit. So a lot of great resources on there. You can just search around there and find stuff that can be supportive to your business. All right, that's all I've got for you guys today. If you wouldn't mind doing my post survey there, it really helps us out with continuing these trainings, improving them. We really appreciate it. Thanks for having me and for your attention today.